Well, hello everybody, and welcome to this discussion as part of the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight, and I've been working for RICS for over 10 years, and I'm now currently working in our Standards, Regulatory and Thought Leadership Directorate, where my role is to look at the whole impact of data and technology right across the built and natural environment. And I'm very pleased today to have a discussion with Stefan and Magnus from Fahrländer Partner. So I'd like to invite them onto the call and ask them to introduce themselves and their organisation and give us a bit of a background on why they started and what their particular experience and skills are.
Yeah, good afternoon as well from my side, Stefan Fahrländer. We prepared some slides, but I cannot show them right now, but that doesn't matter. We put them on the screen later on. I've been involved in hedonic modeling for over 20 years now. Started in the mid-1990s, I would say, at the university, but then later introduced hedonic models for Swiss banks, Swiss brokers, Swiss developers, and started 3 years ago as well to provide models for Germany. So I'm more the technical guy, more into that's a bit my profession, became my profession to do hedonic models. I'm here today with my colleague Magnus Danneck.
Hi, Magnus.
Good afternoon. My name is Magnus Danneck. I spent almost 15 years now in the real estate industry in Germany. I studied business and started business administration and started my professional career with Institut der Deutschen Wirtschaft, which is an economic research institute in Germany. And afterwards, I spent some time with the German Retail Association, in both cases as a PR professional. And then I went over to the real estate industry, and my first role there was with Campus, which was the leading retail real estate broker at that time. And afterwards, I spent almost 11 years with Jones Lang LaSalle. In the end, I was the head of marketing for Northern Europe. And last year, I decided to take the new role at Fahrländer Partner FPRE and to build up the German business for the company.
That's great. Thanks very much. And I believe are you based in Zurich, Stefan? So we have two countries on the line today. So
yeah, that's correct. You can hear it from the accent as well. I'm based in Zurich. And yeah, working from here. But statistics has no borders, so we can perfectly work together. And with COVID, we learned how to use all these tools.
Indeed, we do. Indeed, we did. Well, it's great to have you on the call today. And I think you mentioned that you've been looking at this sort of hedonic real estate valuation for 20 years. Could you, for our viewers and listeners, could you briefly outline hedonic theory and unpack that phrase for us so we can understand what it means in simple terms for us?
Yes, I will give it a try, but if you don't mind, I would start with automated valuation models, because automated valuation model not necessarily means hedonic models.
Yeah.
And I think there is really a lot of possibilities for automated valuation models. And I think it's a very, very interesting field. It depends as well on the regulator, what is allowed and what not. I think automated means big data, automated means analytical statistics, and of course IT integration. And the degree of automation depends a bit on the asset class and on the use case. So I think there you can then distinguish which theoretical model you have behind it, but I think there is other things than hedonic models to do automated valuation models. Of course, you always want to use the market approach, and hedonic models are using this market approach, but you can market approach as well use with other type of, let's say, modelings to support DCF valuation, for example. I think what is important is that a model is always a reduction of the reality, so you always need the expertise. So I think that's a most important point, that the model never replaces the human.
Mm-hmm.
You always need the expertise, the expert to work with the model. I think it's not really a crystal ball. Some examples, I mean, the hedonic models for private properties we use in Switzerland, for example, for 20 years, 25 years almost, in most banks for mortgage, in the mortgage process, but brokers, developers, everybody uses today hedonic model for private properties. We use fully automated hedonic models for market rents, for apartments, for offices, for retail. We use as well models for running costs, discounting factors as well. I wouldn't call them hedonic models. And of course, we use algorithms for automated selection of comparables, etc., etc. So I think there's really many fields of automation of valuation models or support of valuation. You can also make semi-automated DCF models with consistent or hedonic inputs for all parameters you use for the valuation. So there you can really support the expert in his work without making him useless or without replacing. Because I think I'm sure, 100% sure, after 20 years, models help. Statistics is amazing, but it's never perfect. What I see a lot today is like people are talking about statistical methods, artificial intelligence, machine learning, etc. But I think first you need a theory, and then you need data, and then you can do the modeling, and then you do the method. And I think that all has to go together. So you need a theoretical framework which has to do with economics, with expertise as well, sometimes as well with the use case. Then you do the modeling. And there is a lot, a main question is how many characteristics you can get from the properties that you use to do the modeling. Because compilation of data means cost. And then the question is what value is added with the additional characteristics. So there is a bit the limit or a trade-off between compiling data or additional information and the costs. And then finally you can talk about statistical method. And there is also a lot of questions about update stability, like you have to follow the market or be at the market all the time. And then when you cannot control the models and they jump, you have a problem with or your client, the user, has a problem with jumping values. You have problems with the regulator and of course problems with the audits. So I think the statistical method also is an important role, and there's as well a trade-off, I would say, between the choice of the statistical method and then the result for the user. And of course, statistic doesn't help without IT integration. So there is a question of speed. There you have mass requests. If you reevaluate the whole bank mortgage portfolio, that's hundreds of thousands requests.
Yeah.
And of course, it's security issues. So I think it's really a big framework you need to have, and it has to be consistent all in all. The problems I see today is that a lot of people use statistical methods, but they don't have, let's say, the knowledge and experience, the long-term experience in all the fields at the same time. I think to really have a good process, you really have to combine the expertise in all these fields. So this hedonic model is a good solution for many questions. In the end, it's you use comparables, and then like you look for dissimilarities, and then you control or you make a correction for the dissimilarities. So you have a couple of challenges. You need data, and there is data protection laws, not in every country in the same, but there's a question. And then you have to find these correction factors for the dissimilarities. So these hedonic models in our country, Switzerland and Germany, they solve a couple of problems because you don't need to publish the comparables. You can use them in the hedonic model, and then you don't have to publish the single comparable. but you still take the advantage of the differences of characteristics and the paid prices. And the second one is the correction factors that you need to control to correct for these dissimilarities, or can be measured with analytical statistics. So you don't have to, I don't know, make them up or say from your expertise what you find would be a good correction. So I think that's very important to understand, and I think many people don't understand that the hedonic model is largely the same as the use of comparables, and to correct for these similarities. That's exactly the same what you do. It just has to do more with statistics. So hedonic models came up in the end in the 1920s, so 100 years ago almost. And it was very interesting. It was first on prices on farmland, on like characteristics of the ground, productivity of the ground, or then on vegetable prices. Why is the red apple more expensive than the green apple or whatever? So it's more astonishing that you could do all these statistics in the 1920s, because I need a computer to do it. In 1939, it was Court who made a study on car prices, and I think car is a very good example for hedonic theory, because in the end the car has 4 wheels, a steering wheel, and an engine, and it's used to go from A to B. But you see huge price differences in cars, but they all serve the same purpose. So apparently there must be other aspects in a car that define the price. And he was the first one, I think, to use the term hedonic prices. And then later on came the theoretical foundation. So the basic idea of hedonic theory is that a property has characteristics that give you a utility. So it's there can be I don't know, you're close to the city, close to your workplace, or you have a nice view, or you have a nice neighborhood, nice neighbors, or whatever. It's of course then property characteristic like size and standard, and these give you a utility, and you have a willingness to pay for the utility of these characteristics. And the factor prices, or they are implicit prices or hedonic prices, whatever you want to call them, you cannot see them. You can only see the total price that is reflected on the market. So these hedonic prices you have to find out by using analytical statistics. And I think that's the main thing. In the end, the buyer doesn't care in the end for the cost of combining bricks and mortar. I only care as a buyer, I care what is the use or my total utility of this property, and that defines my willingness to pay, and not the combination of bricks and mortar. So that's a big difference to a cost approach or any other approach. So that's a bit the idea of hedonic theory.
So
in a short form.
In a short form. So what are like any sort of tool and methodology, there are advantages and disadvantages, pros and cons. How would you position, these hedonic models? What are their limitations and what are their advantages compared to other approaches?
I think a big disadvantage is that you need to be educated in analytical statistics to understand it. And I studied some statistics, but I'm not like in theoretical statistics and everything. I mean, that's a profession itself. So you need to have, let's say, knowledge as well as in real estate and real estate valuation and everything. You need to know a lot about all this real estate stuff, and at the same time you need to know a lot about statistics. And I think that's a major challenge, because many of the users have to get an idea about what is happening, and you don't really see it. I think that's a major disadvantage on it. I think a big advantage is that you really can use and combine a lot of data, and if you have like 10 characteristics, a macro location, micro location, you solve a problem, a statistical problem with many dimensions. So you can combine all the characteristics at the same time in your statistical analysis, and no brain can do this. So that's the huge advantage on it, that you can really squeeze out the data and get all the information out of the data. And I think to a certain extent, it also makes you more consistent, because it makes a bit independent from the personal view of the user or of the valuer. So I think it gives also more consistency in the data. I think another huge advantage is that you can reevaluate the bank mortgage portfolio, for example. With 100,000 of cases, you can have value on a weekend, but you could never do this by hand on a weekend.
Exactly. That kind
So
of
I mean, it's really I think it has huge advantages. And for 20 years, every 3 months when you do the update, I'm astonished how good it works. But of course, it has its limits. It doesn't work for everything. It doesn't work in every location. It doesn't work for every asset class, etc., etc. So it's not the solution for everything, but I think it's a powerful tool.
So there's obviously a key point there, and I suppose it is perhaps more widely in the real estate industry as we adopt more technology, that there is a skill set issue there in terms of the users of these kinds of approaches to gain more knowledge on at least some basic statistical concepts, to understand to a degree how these models work. They can't necessarily become experts like yourself in terms of developing them, but there does seem to be this need to be the intelligent client of these kind of products when people are using it, whether they're in the banking sector or indeed as real estate professionals. I guess the other interesting piece for me is perhaps how explainable your models are. There's a word that's come to use in the English language around the kind of algorithmic approach, where you're talking about how models can explain the decisions they've made. But with your models and your approaches, what kind of audit trail is there in terms of being able to explain to somebody why your model has come to a particular kind of result?
Yes, I think you're coming now to a statistical classes of methods. If you use, I mean, you can, there is, I don't know, hundreds of statistical methods how you can analyze a set of data. And there is a, nowadays, or when I studied statistics some 15 years ago, there was these neural networks and all these things, you know, coming up with as a like fully automated selection of all these models. And I learned, and I still believe in it, that you should use these methods, you know, to squeeze out the data, to benchmark the data, to see how much information is in the data, and to learn about all the correlations you can find and all the problems you find in the data. But then, and that's what we do, we translate it afterwards in a parametric model, which means in the end you get a big equation, and this equation you can understand. And I can explain in our model, I can explain what's happening.
Indeed.
Because so you can really explain it to 100% what is happening. And in the machine learning models, sometimes you have the disadvantage, you cannot really explain it what happens. And sometimes it finds a bit wrong correlations because it just looks very slow on the data, how it fits best, but it neglects in the end, or today's model classes neglect the theoretical view you need to have on this economic valuation of a property. And you cannot just find correlations like that don't make sense. So you really need to look into it and translate it into a parametric model.
So given you have a unique almost experience of seeing the Swiss and the German markets moving to adopt this kind of technology, how would you compare and contrast the experiences in the two countries from either a regulator's perspective, the different asset classes, the availability of data? What experiences can you share from those markets, which, while so close, presumably have some differences as well?
I would say a similarity is that we both complain about intransparency of data, and we would like to have more data. We always compare with Canada, US, UK, where is more data availability. I think it has to do maybe a bit with I don't know, data protection or whatever with laws. In the end, I have to say, in Switzerland we complain as well, but we have almost all the data we need. Of course, I mean, it's not like a children's birthday. You can always have wishes, but in the end, you have to work with what you have. And there is a lot of data, and it's the same data availability in Germany, I would say. But both complain. So that's the similarity between the two countries. I think from the regulator point of view, there is a huge difference. In Switzerland, there is no like rule how, or even the federal court, they say you have to use a recognized valuation method to make the valuation of a property. It doesn't say how you have to do it. And in Germany, there is a lot of regulation how things have to be done. And I think that has two effects. One is it slows down, of course, the things. Regulation or change of regulation is always slow. I think that's a main reason why hedonic models are not used in Germany by banks, for example, in the mortgage process, or as well in the market for valuation. The brokers, they start to use it, private investors use it because they are like, they connect more freely. But I think that's a huge difference. And in Switzerland, the big banks decided in the end of the 1990s, okay, we switched to hedonic models because it's much cheaper, and they checked it with the results manual valuation by experts, and the hedonic models were always like in the range what the valuer said, but the cost is 10%. So the decision was clear how to do it. And in Germany, the banks would like to do the same. We talk to banks, but they're not allowed to. So I think the regulator, I think that's really a big difference, that the regulator really, in Germany, really slows down the things.
Yeah.
If it's for good, in the end, we don't know. We will see when the market change. Maybe they are right, and maybe the Swiss are wrong. You don't know it.
And many people, I'm sure, will be familiar to a degree with the use of AVMs and these kinds of models in residential property. How far have either you progressed or your sense of the application of these models to commercial real estate, which clearly has a smaller data set in terms of the number of assets and is arguably less homogeneous than residential?
Yeah, I've prepared a slide on that. It has to do with data availability, and it has to do with complexity. So on the top left, you see high complexity of properties and not many transactions in a country. So you have a low number of data points, and you have highly complex data properties. So it's, I would say, to make a hedonic model is impossible.
Yeah.
Well, impossible. Nothing is impossible, but it's really to make a reliable model to estimate the level of market value. That's very difficult. Multifamily house, it's a bit, if it's like simple multifamily houses, that works because you have a better data availability. And if you have 10, 12 apartments, they're all the same. So it's not big complexity. But it works very well for office rent, residential rents. It works as well for retail. So you can use the hedonic models or the hedonic market rents to fill in the market rents in a DCF model. So there you can combine, DCF with hedonic modeling, or you can support DCF with hedonic models. But like a full hedonic model to estimate levels of value, I think is difficult. I think what is possible and what we do as well is to estimate changes, like in sense of price index. That's easier. It's the same as measurement of GDP of countries or whatever. It's 90% modeling, but So the level of the GDP for sure is wrong, but the changes, if they are measured always in the same way, they're quite accurate. So I think it's easier to measure changes of prices than to measure exact price levels in these with these complex properties. But that's only my opinion. There was attempts to make hedonic models for investment properties, but the users in the end said, yeah, it gives out a result or a number comes out. But I think it's really, I think we have to be a bit careful to overload and to be, I don't know, too optimistic about doing everything by the machine.
I understand.
Yeah.
And in terms of one of those dimensions on your Boston grid, there is the availability of data itself, which obviously is a key requirement. How do you see, whether in the I think you said the German market where there was less availability? What do you see as the trajectory of digitization in Germany? Do you think there will be considerable availability of data coming around the corner soon? What's the pace of digitization in Germany?
It's going ahead now. It took, again, maybe a comparison. I mean, it's always difficult to talk about other countries because they don't usually like it when a foreigner says something. We don't like it when someone says about something bad about Switzerland. But we had the same in Switzerland. I mean, there was a mistrust in giving data, like for a data pool.
Yeah.
But once you're in the market and once people trust you, and there it is so important that the companies that do the data work are independent, that they don't do lead generation for other purpose, that they're not involved in valuation of portfolios, they don't do competition in transactions and whatever. So you really have to be 100% independent, and our pride has to be to exactly measure what happens. And we are not allowed to have an interest on high prices or low prices. Our only interest is to measure what happens. And then it takes a while, or it takes time, that the companies trust you. But in Switzerland, we have private data pools.
Yeah.
And we pool the data of many big investors, and they deliver the data how they come. And then we do all the preparation of the data, harmonization of the data and everything. And in Germany, it's more, I don't know, semi-governmental with all these working groups and all these organizations, and they do big projects on how to make a database. But they don't ask the people who work with the data. I mean, it's theoretical work how you have to do a database. But I don't need that. I just need the data and I know how to handle it. So this slows down the things again. But it's coming now, and then it's coming up. There is several data pools coming now, and the availability of these data for these models is going up.
No, that's good. I mean, in a previous life, as in a previous career I worked in more consumer marketing, where we had a data pool of all the households of the UK and the US, and the people that put that data into the pool were direct competitors, but they did recognize that having that full picture of the market with all the transactions was so much more powerful than their narrow few percent of the market, and they had reached a maturity level that I think, unfortunately, perhaps real estate is still struggling to understand. And I think, as you say, it's not so much the technical issues now, it's almost the behavioral issue of understanding that pooling data really is the only way to get that proper 100% or as near as possible view of a market. So it's encouraging to hear that Switzerland has bought into that idea, but obviously Germany's still on that behavioral journey to understand why it's so powerful.
I think, the advantage of Germany is now that others have already done it. So I think it's going much faster in Germany. In Switzerland, it took about 10 years, until, the majority of the companies really learned that pooling data is something good. And it took 10 years, and I think in Germany it's going much faster now because they can yeah, they see the experience of other countries or of other markets. So I'm optimistic for Germany that it goes ahead now.
And one thought, which is very much a very sort of burning topic in the UK market, but I'm sure across Europe, is the whole ESG, environmental, social governance, the ESG agenda. What do you see as developments there in terms of either additional data sets or the market beginning to put value, which would then be reflected in your models on some of these sustainability and other kinds of metrics?
Yeah. I think, I mean, most of the ESG topics you always had in the valuation models. I mean, if I don't know, a location is not sustainable, or if the running costs are too high or whatever, I mean, it's always reflected in the valuation model. What we are doing now, we have a huge project for Swiss market, but as well for German market, for automated estimation of these ESG things, because it's a huge, again, a huge data problem. So in Switzerland, for example, investors, they start now, to collect their carbon, I don't know, emissions and to model carbon emissions, and there is discussions how to do it and everything. And they are more or less ready now with the carbon. But in 2 years, I'm sure nobody is talking about carbon emissions anymore, because then the investors, they know what they have to do. They have their plannings, they have their paths, they have their investment planning to achieve these goals. So I'm sure in 2 years we will only talk about circular economy and all these things, and where all the other topics of sustainability. And now that it's a huge hype on these carbon issues, but I think in 2 years this will be not solved, but they know their way they have to go. And then the other topics come up, and then they start again to hyperventilate. So we try to find a solution now for the market for automated sustainability measurement for every property. And because it's automated based on the data that are available already, you can really go ahead and speed up the things. And of course, it's a bit pragmatic, but over time you will fill up more data and then improve maybe the system, hopefully. But I think that's a huge project now, and people have to do ESG reports for the first time. Yeah. So they try to figure out, how should I do this? They have the first draft now, so it can really support them as well with filling in the data, because in the end it's data handling again. It's a lot of data handling. Yeah. And if you have it in the machines, you can really support the people with the data handling, and then they can concentrate on their strategies and they can concentrate on their plannings. But now they're concentrated on the data handling and preparation of data, and I think that's wrong. I think it's the same in the valuation. You can really support the people with all the locational data, macro location, micro location, everything that's all available. And then the expert can concentrate on the valuation and on the actual work, I would say.
Yeah. So. No, I think that's a very important theme, that as you say, if that data collection and manipulation can be done, it frees up the experts to add the real value that otherwise they would be spending so much time on this housekeeping type of approach. So I guess to wrap up, I mean, this has been fascinating. What do you think are the current trends? We've talked about ESG and clearly that things will move on. Apart from data pooling and people beginning to see the benefits of that, what other kind of trends in digitization are you seeing either in the Swiss or the German markets?
I think that the trend is to integrate along the whole how you call this, the whole chain,
the life cycle.
Yes, but from the planning to the construction, to the management, to the, let's say, demolition and recycling of the materials. And there is a huge thing to be done. There is now a big project at the ETH Zurich, that's Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, about digitalisation in or automation in production. And I mean, those who build in wood, they do it forever, like BIM and all these things, and the CAD and CNC and all these kind of things they do forever. But like these bricks and mortar construction, it's coming now that you do this, and of course with new constructions, you soon will have the data in your BIM, in your digital twin, whatever, and then you can connect it with the economic data and all these life cycle data and everything. But like for the big housing stock, you don't have the data.
No.
So I mean, that would be a huge project, to collect all this data for the housing stock. So there will be a big discrepancy, you say. Oh, my English is bad. Between the housing stock and the new construction.
Yeah.
At least in Switzerland, and I think as well in Germany. But I think it's advancing, and I think that will really help, as well to have a better sight on the properties, and as well to make things more efficient.
As you say, that real focus on what we call that life cycle, from birth to death, if I can use that phrase, of the land, the development phase, the planning, all through the construction, operation, and as you say, that end of life where you want to recycle materials, you want to understand how you can get the best out of the materials that have put in. So.
And I think that's also a bit due to technical innovations we had when we've built the first machines, like for valuation. You couldn't really connect them with other databases. So it was like a single app you could use by yourself. But this connectivity via APIs and data transfer and everything, that helps a lot. And we rebuilt the whole machine in 2012, and we got an enormous flexibility with these new technologies. So, but it really was really a major step, to change the whole technology, which allows now to integrate in any, or to connect with any other application, or with ecosystems, or whatever is the terms nowadays.
Exactly,
I mean, it's always a bit hyped words, but in the end, it's always the same issues we talk about. And it's really this connectivity of, because you never make an application for every use case. So in the same company, like the portfolio manager has totally different use cases than the guy who has to buy properties. So he needs a different front-end application, but he wants to take advantage of the same data models. So you have to connect all these applications. And that's for 10 years now, it's not a problem to do it. But there is still a lot of more connections to be made.
Exactly, yeah. No, and as you know, so many of the data feeds come from different islands of data almost in that way. And as you say, all these different use cases ironically end up wanting the same data set, don't they?
I think what a problem is a bit nowadays, there is so much money around in the industry that everybody almost who has a good idea gets the financing, for a startup, and I think that's perfect. But on one hand, but on the other hand, it doesn't. Sometimes you see startups with great ideas, and it's very useful, but it will never be a business case. But there's a lot of money in there, and a lot of energy in there, and a lot of, I don't know, focus, scope in there, which should not be in there because it will never fly. So I think it will take a while to sort out these companies, and then you can really connect those who will survive.
Yeah,
and I think this process of sorting out, that's ongoing now.
Yeah, it's consolidation, as you say, down to the the survival of the strongest business cases with where they bring value to the ecosystem, as you say. Well, this has been fascinating. We could talk forever, but I just really need to thank both of you, Stefan and Magnus, and I look forward to talking again with our next discussion as part of the Tech Partner Program. So thank you so much, and I look forward to talking to you both again.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye now.